Morning, guys. Some of you said you liked this format, so we're gonna do this again as a speed paint. So there was this shot in the show where Akari was saying to the ninjas, kind of an interesting bit of dialogue. She says, "I cannot respect your profession, skulking like rats, but at least you should do your best." So it's almost like she's poking fun at how sloppy they are as ninjas, as opposed to what you would expect, which is, she's a frightened girl and, really stressed out about the fact that these guys have invaded her space. So it's kind of an interesting glimpse into Akari's psychology. So the upshot of the shot, however, was that I was not satisfied with the staging or the drawing, etc., etc., because it's one of those shots that was done quite some time ago, and I think the design of Akari really wasn't quite as carved in stone as it probably should have been, or could have been at that point. So I'm just kind of pulling things into Krita and trying to be a little commonsensical here about breaking her body up into both, basically the body and the head, so that they can be animated separately. And there's a fair amount, obviously, of lip sync if she's going to say a line as long and complicated as what I just told you. But what am I learning? One of the biggest things I'm learning is symmetry. I am frequently catching myself. Well, I've been flipping the canvas a lot more because you've got a drawing that, your brain just fools you. Your brain says that this is good, balanced, symmetrical, whatever, and you flip the canvas and you realize it's like really lopsided. So this seems to be a brain thing, and it's something you really have to be on guard about. So clearly you can train yourself to draw more symmetrically more of the time, and using guidelines and stuff can help. But at the same time, you have to remember that this is a bit of a cerebral deficit, if you will, and so it's good that we have the ability to simply, flip the canvas and get a fresh view. And frankly, I've never seen a really good digital painter who didn't frequently flip their canvas. So, and in Krita, if you don't know this, that's the M key. How they chose M, I have no idea, but so what made this shot different than the one before is what you see happening right now. This idea that she raises her chin in sort of a proud way when she says, well, okay, and to be clear, the sequencing of the lip sync here in the pencil test and what finally wound up in the show aren't the same, because number one, I discovered that some of these keyframes, not the one you're seeing now, the transition to her raising her chin is fine, but there's some movement in the center, like right there, that I ultimately rejected. And so I felt that her proud expression felt better if it came earlier. So the timing here actually does change downstream. But in any case, so we got through the pencil test, and now I'm just trying to break things up into appropriate layers for ink and paint. And as you can see, if you look at the palette of brushes there, you can see I'm using the one that the icon looks like a technical drawing pen. So I've really just had better luck with that lately. The cost that goes with using a brush like that is sometimes subtlety in the lines, which you could program some pressure sensitivity into it, maybe for thickness or even opacity to a degree, I suppose. Although that's dangerous because it gets you back in that situation where you might go to do a fill and things aren't as closed as you think they are. So, and that can be really frustrating. It just makes the painting process really tedious. But right here in her eyes, this is where you see the weakness of that particular brush, because the eyes feel a little bit too bold, I guess. It could be that going to a slightly thinner brush on some of these detail areas might be kind of useful. So, not a hard, hard fast thing I've decided. I'm just kind of looking at the results and evaluating. One thing I have been, something I find I do a lot is delete keyframes. And so I actually map that in Krita to Control-Shift-X. So when I hit Control-Shift-X, whatever keyframe selected just gets immediately toasted. Comes up. Anytime I bump into something that seems to come up reasonably frequently, I just go ahead and do a hotkey for it if I can. So yeah. Actually, what you just saw made me think about sort of feature creep with software. A lot of times people say, well, why don't we have some kind of like guidelines? How about a guideline layer? I was just thinking that thought while I was doing this. Now here I did a little experiment with just some squash and stretch for just a tween that only lasts for 2 frames, see if I could get away with it. It kind of worked, kind of didn't. But what I was saying about feature creep is that whole idea is like so dumb, because obviously you could just create a new layer and draw your own guidelines, right? It's no different from any other layer. But you see this with software a lot of times. Is there's this feature creep where they'll add a new feature, like, for example, a guideline layer, where the core functionality that to solve that problem was there all along. And sometimes you sort of see the community calling out for a new feature that's really just redundant, and that's because they haven't thought creatively about how to use the features that are already there. So you don't want to be that person. You want to favor tools that are pretty simple and where your creativity is in how you use that tool or those tools is more how you solve problems. I don't know if that makes perfect sense, but anyway. Well, because the problem is feature creep always leads to bugs. Always leads to bugs. So that's why I'm not using Krita 4.2. I'm using 4.1.7 because despite the new features in version 2, some fundamental things, which I can't remember what all of them were, there were several, but there's fundamental things that worked fine in 4.1.7 that are broken now in 4.2, which is always kind of disappointing. But that's what you get. You sort of have to just try the new versions and see if they're actually beneficial, and if not, move on down the road, or stay back on the road you were on, I guess would be a more accurate way to put it. So here you can see I sort of shifted things around so that I was still sort of messing with this squash and stretch frame, but I think ultimately all of these, that cluster of 3 keyframes at the end, I think, yeah, they just got moved up. Because you just realize that it's amazing, because it keeps you honest as an animator too, because you have to think about the integrity of the drawings where everything is held. If those aren't perfect, then everything's not perfect, because frankly that's where most of the viewer's time is going to be spent. And as you can see from that squash and stretch transitional frame, you can get away with murder if you're on 2s and you're getting from here to there, and it's only going to be on the screen for 2 seconds. You can literally get away with anything. But once it lands, you better make sure it looks right. So right there you can see some winky stuff with her eyes. When the drawing lands, it is not quite good enough, and I believe here later I went ahead and addressed that. I don't remember for sure, but I think the squash and stretch frame went the way of the buffalo as well. I think they actually got kicked on out of there. So we'll see. We will see. I wanted to put some indication of her nose in there. So yeah, I think we're coming up on the part here where I said, now wait a minute, what about this? We got this last frame where she lands on this proud pose, and look how crooked her eyes are. there it is. So see, and I flipped the canvas. 'Cause really, the eye was actually too big. You know, it wasn't the right size. It wasn't oriented quite right. So I was really glad I took that step. It definitely made the final result better. So render. Well, the render and Blender part is still in here because this shot was really amended fairly aggressively at the edit stage. It's gonna go by fast here, so it's hard to see, but that movement of the head, I realized was not working because and you can see I just kept copying over the keyframes and having fewer of them to see if it looked better, and every time I changed it looked better. So that meant I had to change some stuff on these other layers. But since this video is going to be 11 minutes and this is sped up 800%, so 11 times 8, yeah, I mean, you're talking about an hour and a half of non-stop work. Let's say 2 hours, probably. So that's not too bad. And I think there's your final result, pretty much.